So if you've been out there trying to buy a house lately, or maybe you've just been doom scrolling through listings, you've definitely felt it. It's this feeling that there just aren't enough homes to go around, and the ones you do find, they are unbelievably expensive. Well, I'm here to tell you, you are not imagining things. The US is smack in the middle of a massive housing shortage. And in this explainer, we are going to break down exactly why that is. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at just how huge this housing gap really is. Then we'll turn back the clock and see how more than a decade of not building enough got us into this mess. After that, we'll talk about the real-world impact, the affordability squeeze. We'll also unpack the new curveballs like interest rates and global uncertainty. And finally, we'll try to pin down an answer to the big question. Just how massive is this shortage, really? Okay, so first things first, let's just get our arms around the scale of this problem. We are not talking about a little dip in inventory here. We are talking about a massive, widening gap, a shortage that is literally measured in the millions of homes. Yeah, that's the number. To meet the country's housing needs for 2025, and that includes everything from single-family homes to apartments, we are an estimated 4.03 million units short. This one number right here is really at the heart of the entire crisis. And this chart shows that this isn't just a big problem, it's a stubborn one. You can see the deficit actually ticked up from 2024, and yeah, it's a little bit down from the peak in 2023, but the gap is still just enormous. This is not some temporary blip on the radar. It's a deep structural issue we're dealing with. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? And that brings us right to our next point, a full decade of underbuilding. To really get what's happening today, you have to understand what wasn't happening for the last 10 plus years. This quote from Daniel Hale over at Realtor.com, it just says it all, doesn't it? The key phrase there is digging out. It paints such a powerful picture. We're not just filling in a little pothole. We are in a deep hole, a hole created by over 10 years of not building enough homes, and we're just now starting to try and climb our way out. And this really gets to why this is such a tough nut to crack. The problem is deeply rooted. What that means is, even when construction starts to pick up, the entire industry is basically playing this frantic game of catch-up against a deficit that's been growing for over a decade. And just to put that into perspective for you, economists figure that even if we could magically wave a wand and boost construction by 50% overnight, it would still take 7 years just to close the current job. 7 years. That really tells you how big and how baked in this shortage has become. But these are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. This housing gap has a very real, very human cost. And that brings us to the affordability squeeze. Here is a perfect, if kind of painful example of what that cost looks like. The number of young adults still living at home is way higher than it was a decade ago. And why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. When you don't have enough homes, the prices for the ones that are available just skyrocket, making it incredibly hard for people to afford to move out and start their own lives. And here's Danielle Hale again, basically connecting the dots for us. The lack of supply is what directly creates these affordability nightmares. It's a simple and frankly brutal equation. Not enough homes means more competition, which means higher prices, and that ultimately means people get sidelined from ever being able to own a home. So as if a decade of not building enough wasn't a big enough problem, the whole story has gotten way more complicated lately, which brings us to a brand new twist: rates, risk, and uncertainty. Man, home buyers are in such a tough spot right now. On the one hand, there was this little glimmer of hope when mortgage rates finally started to fall. But on the other hand, new conflicts around the world have popped up, and that's threatening to push inflation and interest rates right back up again. Let's just walk through how this chain reaction could play out, okay? So a conflict kicks off overseas. That could easily make oil prices spike. That spike in oil could then refuel inflation across the board. And if inflation takes off again, you can bet the Federal Reserve is going to be way less likely to cut interest rates, which keeps mortgages expensive and basically wipes out any of those recent gains in affordability. So we've established that the problem is huge and it's complicated. But that leaves us to a really critical question. Just how big is it? Well, as we're about to see, it kind of depends on who you ask. Just take a look at this table. Realtor.com says the gap is over 4 million.
Harvard is right there with them at almost 3.8 million. But then you have the National Association of Home Builders with a much lower number. So why the massive difference? Well, it's all about how they measure it. Some are looking at household formation, like how many new families need a place to live, while others are looking at things like vacancy rates, which is how many homes need to be empty for a market to be considered healthy.
But if you start to break down these numbers by price, a really clear picture starts to emerge. The data shows that the shortage is absolutely the worst for starter homes. We are short hundreds of thousands of homes at the most affordable price points. And that, of course, hits first-time buyers the absolute hardest.
So really, here's the bottom line. While all the experts might argue about the exact number, is it 1 million, is it 4, they all agree on the fundamental problem. No matter how you slice it, no matter how you run the numbers, there are millions of homes missing from the US market. Period.
And that really captures the monumental challenge we're facing. We are in a hole that is millions of homes deep, a hole that was dug over a decade and is now being made even more complicated by all of today's economic uncertainty. And that leaves us with one critical question to chew on. Is simply building our way out the only answer?